Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host over the course of the next 30 minutes. Joining me in the studio this afternoon is Mr. Jason Bostic with the West Virginia Coal Association, and we're going to just generally be talking about some of the current events going on within the industry, some of the various administrative actions, some market situations, some of the increase and uptick in production and coal consumption that we've experienced over throughout the course of the year, actually. So we're going to get right into some of those topics. And Jason, just so good to see you again, and
thanks for having me
welcome to today's program. I guess it's a fair statement to say that most of the uptick in the early part of the year within the industry, increased production, a few mines going back to work, some markets that seem to be expanding, export predominantly. I guess most of the good things that have occurred has been sustained throughout the here now. We finished 3/4 of the year.
Yeah, because I think that first off, I think maybe the best place to start is the remarkable amount of market stabilization that we've seen for the industry. And we've gone from quarter after quarter, month after month, lost production, whether it was to the metallurgical market or to the domestic thermal market. That seems to have stabilized. The markets, I believe, are back into balance. The places where our coal was sent to make electricity, we're sending even more of it. And as you mentioned, the export market has been a real relief for the Central Appalachian, Southern West Virginia producers. It's increased something to the effect of about 100% year over year from last year. So that sustainability, excuse me, that improvement and that sustainability has been a real bright light for the industry. But the other thing that I think lends credibility to the sustainability of that increase is the regulatory pressures that the president has lifted off the industry since he took office, and just the certainty that we have as operators and investors that back our business have that there'll be some future here for the coal industry has really, really helped. It's helped us capitalize the mines and take advantage of production opportunities that otherwise I think we would have lost.
Well, and it highlights the difference that you see from time to time from one administration to the other, where they put their emphasis, what their core issues, are or intended to be. And I don't think there's any question the previous administration was more interested, I believe, in trying to see an expanded role of renewable energy forms. I think they wanted to jumpstart this country's reliance on renewable energy forms, and they somewhat of a wanted to alter the traditional path of relying so much on fossil fuels, and where the current administration seems to be more interested in preserving some of the basic the remaining aspects of our industrial force and component of today's workforce and all.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chris. And take it a little further, for several years under the Obama administration, the previous administration, the electricity suppliers around this country were concerned about the accelerated retirement of coal-fired or baseload generation, coal-fired and nuclear plants. And it's almost like those concerns fell on deaf ears, whether it was through the Energy Secretary or through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or FERC. But under the new administration, I think those concerns are finally being heard, and that this rushed move towards renewables, or even market manipulation, if you want to go that far, was having real adverse impacts on the reliability and resiliency of the country's energy grid. And I think the new administration recognizes that and has taken steps to make sure that it stays in balance, so that we as a country or certain regions don't find ourselves short on energy, or more importantly, short on electricity in times of need in the summer peak months or in the winter peak months.
I know we had a very severe February, and what became known as the
polar vortex.
Yeah, polar vortex, and during that period, I think the utilities would confirm that we almost reached a crisis with being able to provide and deliver household and industrial electricity.
We did, and there were a couple of what's called emergency calls, where individual plant operators have to notify the regional grid operators that they are hours away from taking a plant offline. I think we reached a new level of emergency calls that were made by those plant operators to FERC and to the regional power grid operators. But interesting, during the polar vortex, in the Appalachian power system, AEP power system, 89% of its capacity that has been retired over the years since the polar vortex moving forward, and 89% of that capacity, which was all coal-fired, that was retired in response to some Clean Air Act regulations. 89% of that capacity was running to supply the electricity needs of this part of the country. And that's one system, that's AEP. Southern Company, which is also retired, lots of coal-fired generation, was running 50% of its since retired generators at full capacity. So that really was a crisis level on, on many aspects, because natural gas supplies that would otherwise be headed for a power plant to generate electricity, natural gas supplies are interruptible by order of the federal government to be diverted to residential needs, home heating needs. And you had several situations where gas-fired power plants had their natural gas supplies interrupted for that purpose. So even though the plants were sitting there and were capable of running, the federal government had diverted the supply so that people didn't go without heat.
Well, that's amazing. And, you know, the likelihood of that happening again is ever so present. And I think the new administration recognizes that and wants to secure a certain percentage of baseload generation, or a generation that we are you know, currently experiencing, perhaps even an expanded unit. But and I don't know who can argue against that, because, you know, we've become so reliant on electricity, household electricity. I mean, our whole world revolves around it today. And the consequences of being without electricity become more and more severe and catastrophic within just a matter of days.
It does. And, you know,
We see it after severe weather occurrences. You know, when a community, not alone a couple houses, is out of power for a prolonged period of time, and by that we mean just just few hours.
Yeah, and you know, you can never have a 100% secure electrical system, but the closest you can come to it, I think, from a fuel and plant supply perspective, are nuclear and coal generation facilities, because those are the only two kinds of power generation that have fuel storage on site. You know, nuclear plants obviously have the fuel rods on site. Coal plants have stockpiles of coal, and typically try to keep 60 to 90 days of burnable coal on the ground just in case there's a supply interruption. The wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time, so obviously you can't rely on that from a resiliency and reliability standpoint. And natural gas power plants typically only have one pipeline. So if there is a service disruption on the fuel supply end, those plants are going to go offline. A coal-fired power plant, if there is an interruption to rail service, if there's a derailment or some severe weather, there's always alternative transportation methods. You can bring it in from another railroad route, or if things get so desperate, you can actually offload the coal and truck it into the plant. And the other generation sources really don't have that. So I think the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, the President, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission recognize that. And the rule proposals that are out there now would require the grid operators to recognize that as well, because what's happened over the last couple of years, particularly through individual state mandates, preferential treatment was given to the dispatch of renewable resources. And that has caused market manipulation that I think has placed some of the larger coal-fired plants and nuclear plants in peril of closing too early.
You know, as you're talking, I'm reflecting back, you know, this time a year ago, we were talking about the implementation of the former administration's Clean Power Plan and all the devastation that was going to cause, and how there was a general thought that was intentional, you know, to begin at a very accelerated pace, backing off this country's reliance on coal and fossil fuel, but primarily coal, at least initially. And here we are a year later, and we're talking about the goal of the current administration is to protect and preserve for the security and resiliency of the grid, and to prevent unintentional or intentional disruptions of the electric delivery system.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because we're talking about weather-related disruptions, but today, you have to be equally concerned with terrorism and homeland security.
Yes, a targeted attack to compromise one of these plants or one of these transmission lines could be devastating, because, as you know, the electric grid across the country is interconnected. And a failure in any one part of it, if it's massive enough and sudden enough, can bring down, not only, it'll spread from your street to your block, to your city, to your county, to your state. It can do that very quickly. Now,
It'll be just like looking at the national, a national map when it starts showing, the blackouts and how they occur. I mean, whether you do that on a magnified basis and do it on a local or a city or a municipality or a state or a country or even global, you can just ratchet that up or down however you want the view to be.
Yeah.
But it seems like things are still positive, and there's reason to be positive. A lot of question. Somebody in a conversation earlier today used the term, and I forget what it was right now, but boy, it seemed to really fit. It had to do with a caution. We're seeing a little more coal produced. We're seeing a little more coal traffic around the state. People are seeing barges, at the volume, and coal cars. They're hearing the trains at night and truck traffic. And it's just, it's at a little bit of a higher frequency than what it was 6 months ago or a year ago, especially. But people are still so cautious because the gloom and doom has been reigning for 7 or 8 years now.
Well, Chris, I think the appropriate terminology would probably be cautiously optimistic, because, and the way I phrase it is, the market response that we've seen, the positive market response, is very fragile. As thankful as we are to have the export market for thermal coal from southern West Virginia, that is, we're shipping it to other countries, I think that market's very, very fragile. It would be nice to have that coal still going to power plants in this country, but because of the actions of the previous administration and regulatory decisions they made, we don't. So being dependent on that much of an export market is somewhat concerning. Now, again, we're thankful that we have it, but it's not nearly as stable as shipping coal down the street to the coal-fired power plant that we had 8 years ago.
There's a lot of businesses and industries that are beginning to have to be within a global marketplace, and coal's been there for the life of the industry.
Absolutely.
We've always been in an international market, as well as a domestic, but we just have such a strong presence throughout the world. A lot of people still don't really understand that so many foreign countries don't have are not energy sufficient like we are here domestically. We have ample amount of gas and coal, and we can make our own steel. And you go to a lot of these foreign places, and there's no coal in the ground, and there's no shale gas to extract. So they have to import, in some cases, 100% of their fuel supply. And coal's always been it's been a primary fuel around the world.
Yes, and one of the monikers that used to be used to describe West Virginia's coal industry was the world's fuel of choice. And we still, I think, are deserving of that title, because export markets primarily for West Virginia coal in the past were driven by metallurgical coal production, because if you want to make good steel, you usually have to have some percentage of West Virginia coal. We just have the best quality stuff found anywhere in the world. But what you've seen as a result of the increase generally of the population around the world's use of electricity, and some geopolitical disruptions, that otherwise reliable supplies of oil or natural gas were interrupted. So countries in Europe that hadn't imported steam coal or thermal coal to make electricity in several decades have suddenly turned back to us, because we are such a reliable supply of fuel. We're close to the transportation outlets. We've got a trained and well-qualified workforce that can crank the coal out safely, productively, and on time.
Well, and the truth is that any other country that embarks upon mining, and a lot of those countries that have been mining for decades, still come here, still contact our mineral engineering universities. They still contact your organization, and they want to see how we're doing it here. They want to see it from safety to operations to environmental quality. You're exactly right. No one does it quite as well as what we do it here.
Yes. And the only thing that's concerning, other than the pain that the closure of the power plants has had on the industry and the loss of that market, the other concern that we have that you've witnessed, Chris, is the closure of those plants and the resulting closure of the mines is the loss of the workforce and the loss of the infrastructure. So that when the market does come back, or in our case it did come back, and suddenly we're struggling to put production units back into operation because we've lost the infrastructure, the belt lines, the preparation plants, the railroad lines, or quite frankly, we've lost the trained workforce that was capable of producing that coal safely and efficiently.
You know, to that point, I know we're still down. We've been able to bring a few miners back to work that were furloughed. We've hired some new miners as an industry, but we still have 10, 11, 12,000 miners that were employed 4 or 5 years ago that are not employed today. Just pure statistics, we're down 12,000. The governor just advanced, legislature passed, and the people of West Virginia voted for a road bond measure that's going to result in billions of dollars being expended here within the state to build new infrastructure, to repair bridges and roads. And I make that point because there's a lot of new jobs that are anticipated. There are thousands of highway jobs, highway construction, engineering jobs that are envisioned over the next couple of years. And it seems like a lot of those laid off miners who everybody wants to retrain to be a refrigerator repairman. I make that point because we've been through this a couple times previously. But it seems like those guys ought to be first up, those heavy equipment operators, guys that run dozers, pans, rock trucks. These guys have really acquired a level of expertise running the heavy machinery that you won't find anywhere else. So it just seems like there would be a natural, recruitment there or transition of those individuals from mining to road construction, road building.
I certainly hope so, Chris, because in addition to having the specialized training, the fact that that's what those guys did day in, day out was move dirt and rock, just happened to do it in relationship to a coal mine. I also believe that working through the coal industry, they've already got an established work ethic in that they were able to pass a drug test, pass a drug screening to be employed in our industry, and they obviously show up every day. So I think for the transition to the road bond construction and what I hope will be some positive economic benefits, I think that's just very natural. They should probably look to the coal fields to find their workforce.
Not the topic of today's discussion, but there's also been some discussion previously about coming up with like a for lack of a better term, a gold and a state gold card. And if you had that gold card, that meant you met the training requirements for industrial positions, and you were qualified to work either in coal or oil and gas, pipeline development, road construction, with minimal training. So maybe we can get to that point. I know we've advocated that previously, so that you wouldn't have to start completely over in your training or education pursuits.
And I think that certainly makes sense, Chris, because as you know probably better than anybody, from a safety training standpoint, I don't know that there's any other industry that takes it to such a level of excellence, if you will, or detail than the coal industry. Our safety regulations and training regulations are pretty detailed.
And I'm forever amazed when I go out on a surface job, the level of expertise that exists out there. When we think of miners and when people talk about miners, underground miners typically come first to an individual's mine, or it's what the visual represents, and rightfully so. Don't want to take anything away from those guys because they're the world's best, and we'll just say that and move on. But our guys at our surface mines, man, they deserve a lot of kudos. I mean, they operate those machines out there with such pride and perfection. I mean, they really do.
They do.
And I don't think enough is said about our surface miners.
I've heard the remark made several times, especially in terms of reclamation, when we were putting the contours of the land back and restoring the grass and the trees, that instead of equipment operators, these guys are almost artisans because they're that good at what they do.
I mean, they take the blade of those dozers, and I don't know how many tons that do, depending on the size, but they take the blade of that dozer and they feather that ground, like a baker does icing on a cake. I mean, it's sculptured. It is artistry.
And you can go on in certain operations and look at the reclamation as it progresses, and the mine superintendents or the mine foreman and the mining engineers can point to the individual operators that did that particular piece of work by the way the ground's reconfigured.
And I know I've said this several years ago that this is the only place in the world where you rebuild mountains, and we are. I mean, we're returning things to original contour here when no one else is after during the post mining, or we were doing it to such a degree no one else was here. And when you go out at these surface mines, I mean, the land is left. And your average person doesn't realize that the land, based on the reclamation standards today and the expertise of these, I mean, not only do we have these equipment operators, but you got landscape architects and horticulturists and agronomists and foresters out there that are all involved in returning that land back to a state generally today much better than what it was pre-mining, and a lot of different configurations, and try to accommodate some post-mine land uses out there.
Yeah, Chris, to give you an example, over the years, reclamation has evolved to the point now where, in addition to just restoring the straight contour of the land, that we can rebuild stream courses. Some of these very steeply sloped, intermittent and ephemeral stream courses that go all the way to the ridge top. We've gotten to the point now, we've advanced our expertise that we're able to reconstruct those, and through advances in pure land reclamation technology, accelerate tree growth on these operations by as much as 15 years. So it doesn't take as long for them to look like their natural state as it did previously at the dawn of the surface mining technology.
Getting good help from the legislature here today. It seems like both houses, the Senate under Mitch Carmichael and the House under Tim Armstead, the different energy committees with Randy Smith and Mark Zeteslo, Delegate Williams and Delegate Kelly from the Wood County area. I mean, these guys are so interested in trying to help the industry do what they can legislatively, administratively throughout the year. Governor Justice has done just a super job. He's developed a partnership with the Senate President and the Speaker, to see what he can do individually, and working with those guys to try to help the industry sustain its markets and all. And I know he has a close working relationship with the president, so I guess good things, stands to reason that good things will come. And
Certainly, and just on that note, Chris, I'll make the observation that our ability to respond to the improved market and the stabilization that we're taking advantage of, and that the state's taking advantage of, increased tax revenues. I don't know that we would have been able to do that without the legislature's assistance over the past 3 or 4 years. Some of the bills and some of the statutes, some of the regulations that were addressed allowed us to hang on, so when the market came back, we could snap back into production. I don't know that without the legislature's assistance we could have done that. And certainly since Governor Justice has been elected, I would put him in that category as well. So as the market continues to stabilize, that we'll be able to take advantage of that. But more importantly, because we are now tied so much to the metallurgical coal in the export market, it's a little more erratic than the electric generation market. So we're going to have to be able to weather the ups and downs, be it week by week, month by month, in those markets, and the changes that they've made will allow us to do that.
Well, I think they all, every individual we mentioned here, has an appreciation for the industry, the contributions fiscally and economically and to the job base of the state, and all have an interest to see it improve going forward. Excuse me. So what are some of the issues you see on the horizon here that might be of interest to the average miner watching today's program?
Here's, I think, the most important thing to mention for the folks that are tied directly to our business is the upcoming hearing from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency about what EPA calls the Clean Power Plan. It's actually the Obama administration's proposal to restrict carbon emissions. You mentioned earlier in the program it would have led to an accelerated retirement and declining coal-fired generation. The EPA administrator is coming to Charleston later part of this month to actually hold public hearings on his proposal to revise and reissue that plan, we hope, in a way that acknowledges the contribution that coal makes to the country. So I think everybody needs to have that on their radar screen. Certainly encourage them to come to the state capitol and let their voices be heard to EPA, because as we learned the hard way under the previous administration, so much of our destiny rests within the bureaucratic structure of these federal regulatory agencies.
Well, it comes down, and we've had this discussion, we're just impacted so much by public policy.
We are.
You know, it's not real complex, it's not real sophisticated, but it's just the formation of public policy that, or legislation that, impacts our industry probably more so than most other industries.
And I would just encourage, we will, as we get closer to the hearing date, we will have the details on that available on our webpage. And I think they've been running the banner throughout the program, the links to the webpage. I would encourage everybody to check that the closer we get to the end of the month to get the details about that hearing.
Well, that's probably a pretty good place to stop in the program. There's a lot of good things going on. There's reasons to be positive, first time in a long time. So, hey, thanks so much for coming by and just sharing some of your views and thoughts with us. And, allow me to, turn to our viewing audience and thank everyone for watching the Coal Scene today on the Library Television Network. So with that, have a great day.